Welcome to this residency-level explainer on the psychodynamics of obsession, focusing on control, aggression, guilt, and undoing. Today, we are rigorously deconstructing the intrapsychic architecture of obsession. We're moving way past those basic surface-level DSM checklists to understand exactly how and why these symptoms and traits manifest in the mind. So if you're looking to truly unpack the hidden architecture of the obsessive mind, well, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get into it. Okay, let's quickly run through our agenda for today. We've got 1. Core differential OCD versus OCPD. 2. Psychodynamics of OCD symptoms. 3. The compromise formation. 4. OCPD personality organization. 5. Defense mechanisms of OCPD. And finally, 6. Integrated clinical implications.
Starting right off with Section 1, Core Differential, OCD versus OCPD. We really need to establish the boundary between these two right away, because mixing them up will completely derail your treatment plan.
So, the absolute crucial point here is the profound psychodynamic difference between having a symptom and having a character structure. OCD is characterized by intrusive, unacceptable thoughts and impulses. These symptoms cause massive anxiety. They are ego-dystonic. The patient literally desperately wishes to be rid of them. Why? Because the alien nature of the symptom terrifies the core self. The ego feels like it's actively under assault. But on the flip side, obsessive-compulsive personality disorder, or OCPD, is a lifelong, pervasive pattern of rigid character traits. It is ego-syntonic. The OCPD patient views their perfectionism, their orderliness, and their intense need for control not as a problem at all, but as highly adaptive. These traits are actually the ego's primary defense strategy, built from early childhood to ward off vulnerability.
Moving right along to Section 2, Psychodynamics of OCD symptoms. Let's really shift our focus to the exact intrapsychic conflicts driving obsessive-compulsive disorder.
Picture this as a literal war inside the patient's mind. In OCD, the patient is plagued by intrusive, highly unacceptable impulses, very frequently aggressive or destructive in nature. Where does this internal war actually originate? Well, developmentally, we often trace this back to early battles for control and autonomy with caregivers, often conceptualized around the anal stage. The child's natural aggressive or defiant impulses are met with strict prohibition, which leads to the internalization of an incredibly harsh, punishing superego. So later in life, when an unacceptable aggressive impulse arises, it violently clashes with this superego. This massive collision generates profound ambivalence, immense guilt, an exaggerated sense of responsibility, and intense signal anxiety. Basically, the ego sounds the alarm because something forbidden is trying to break through into consciousness.
Section 3. The compromise formation. Now, you might be wondering, how do these chaotic internal forces actually produce the observable symptoms we see sitting across from us in the clinic?
Let's map the mind as this happens in real time. Step 1, an aggressive impulse arises from the deepest parts of the unconscious. Step 2, the ego detects this threat, instantly triggering signal anxiety. Step 3, defenses are mobilized, primarily repression, to banish the impulse. But here's the catch. The psychic energy of that impulse doesn't just vanish. It doesn't stay buried. Which leads to Step 4. It emerges distorted. We define this brilliantly elegant maneuver as a compromise formation. The obsession or compulsion simultaneously defends against the forbidden wish, keeping it out of full awareness, while partially gratifying or expressing it in a completely disguised symptomatic form.
To really wrap our heads around this, let's walk through our 6-step clinical analysis, starting with the defense of undoing. So by definition, undoing is a defense mechanism involving the retroactive negation of a perceived harm or forbidden thought. Its developmental origin lies in the magical thinking of early childhood. You know, that belief that thoughts are literally equivalent to actions. The intrapsychic mechanism involves deploying a physical or mental counteraction to neutralize the terrifying aggressive impulse. The clinical manifestation, that's your classic ritual or compulsion. For a patient example, imagine someone who has a fleeting, totally unacceptable thought of their spouse dying, and immediately they must tap a doorframe 3 times to undo the thought and keep their spouse safe. The clinical implication here is that the therapist must interpret the hidden aggression driving the anxiety, not just look at the behavioral surface. Now, we follow that exact same 6-step sequence for displacement. Its definition is shifting terrifying affect to a much safer object. Its developmental origin is the early fear of retaliation from primary caregivers. The mechanism is detaching terror or rage from its true source and reattaching it to a neutral trigger. It naturally manifests as obsessive fixations on safe targets. As an example, Someone might obsessively clean their kitchen to avoid dealing with the messy, dangerous reality of their intense rage toward a parent. The clinical implication? We have to realize the manifest obsession is always a decoy for the latent conflict.
Let's transition over to another major defense mechanism, reaction formation. The definition here is the transformation of an unacceptable wish or impulse into its exact opposite. The intrapsychic mechanism of reaction formation is honestly exhausting. It requires massive, continuous psychic energy to keep the unacceptable impulse fiercely repressed by hyperactivating its behavioral opposite. It's an elegant, yet desperate psychological maneuver.
To ground this clinically and finish our 6-step sequence, let's look at a classic patient example and its clinical manifestation through Gabbard's famous vignette of the accountant. This patient was constantly worried his boss might be angry with him, a fear that was actually a displacement and projection of his own intense secret resentment. So how did his ego handle this? Well, as an unconscious defense, his clinical manifestation was becoming incredibly obsequious and ingratiating toward his boss. His fawning behavior was a textbook compromise formation. It masked a deeply repressed, unconscious wish to explode in anger, perfectly illustrating reaction formation in action. The clinical implication for us is that extreme rigid kindness in these patients often points directly to a hidden well of rage.
All right, Section 4, OCPD personality organization. Now we're zooming out. We are moving from the isolated symptom to the entire character structure.
Unlike the symptom-bound OCD patient we just discussed, the OCPD patient's entire character is organized around themes of control, rigidity, and perfectionism. If we explore their developmental origin, these individuals often felt unvalued or unloved early in life. This leads to a deep reservoir of rage and unfulfilled dependency yearnings. To protect against the sheer terror of being unloved and to defend against their own unacceptable dependent and aggressive feelings, they develop this counter-dependent, rugged individualism. Their ego is just crushed under the weight of an internalized, highly punishing superego, a judge that demands absolute flawlessness just to be deemed worthy of existence. In their minds, they literally must be perfect to be safe.
Section 5. Defense Mechanisms of OCPD. To actually maintain this heavy psychological armor day in and day out, the OCPD ego relies on a very specific suite of neurotic defenses.
We must apply our 6-step deconstruction here to isolation of affect and intellectualization. Their definition is the complete stripping of emotion from thought, retreating entirely into abstraction. The developmental origin of these defenses is usually found in early environments where emotional expression was punished or just chaotic, teaching the child that feelings are inherently dangerous. The intrapsychic mechanism acts like a cognitive scalpel. It literally severs the neural and psychic link between a memory or idea and its natural affective resonance. The clinical manifestation is a highly logical, almost Mr. Spock-like cognitive style. For a patient example, an OCPD patient might speak about an incredibly painful, traumatic personal history as if they are simply reading you a grocery list, completely detached from the interpersonal warmth or sorrow that should naturally accompany it. The critical clinical implication is that while this creates a safe distance for the patient, it massively frustrates the therapist. It creates a huge barrier to the therapeutic alliance that you have to actively and carefully dismantle.
This dynamic of masked aggression is just perfectly captured in the clinical vignette of Mr. M.M., an obsessive-compulsive printer. He presented in therapy as highly passive and submissive, completely unable to express any anger. But one day, deeply irritated that his therapist was staring at him, he couldn't actually voice the hostility. Instead, he stormed to the door and masked his repressed, sadistic anger with a pseudo-caring, icy exit line, "Don't slip on the ice." This is a stunning clinical manifestation of unconscious hostility, completely veiled by doing, undoing, and reaction formation.
What's absolutely fascinating about this slide is how it reveals the OCPD patient's split unconscious. There's a profound duality here. Let's really look at this dynamic. In front of authority figures or superiors, they masochistically submit to their own punishing superego. They become a hyper-conscientious, self-tormenting, perfect worker. But flip the script to their subordinates, and they project their denied sadism, becoming ruthlessly controlling, hypercritical, and domineering, all while consciously maintaining a pure, unbroken sense of absolute moral superiority.
And finally, Section 6, Integrated Clinical Implications. We have to translate all of these mechanistic insights into an actual workable therapeutic strategy. So, how do we treat the obsessive mind? While psychodynamic treatment of OCD involves analyzing the specific dynamic meaning of the symptom as a compromise formation, treating OCPD is vastly different. The clinician must essentially survive an arduous transference. The OCPD patient will actively try to ritualize the therapy sessions. Why? Well, to maintain absolute control and avoid any spontaneous affective exchange that might trigger their repressed vulnerability. They will monopolize the session with endless details just to avoid real interaction, and they often induce intense boredom, frustration, or a feeling of being fenced in the therapist. But remember, that countertransference of feeling emotionally distanced, that is actually vital diagnostic data for you.
The central clinical move with OCPD is to systematically confront the patient's affect phobia. You have to carefully cut through their endless smokescreen of factual details and intellectualizations to expose the visceral, here-and-now emotions they are so desperately avoiding. By confronting defenses like isolation of affect, you actually help them experience the anger, the dependency, and the grief they've blocked out for so long, gradually reducing the profound shame tied to their true imperfect self-image.
I'm going to leave you with a rather heavy question to consider. If the obsessive's entire lifelong character structure is an elaborate, unconscious defense against their own destructive rage and terrifying vulnerability, as we systematically dismantle this rigid defensive armor, in therapy, how do we safely contain the very aggressive impulses the patient has spent a lifetime holding at bay? It is quite literally the ultimate challenge of dynamic therapy. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this helped illuminate the intricate, fascinating world of the obsessive mind.